Booster 19 has finally completed a full duration and full thrust 33 engine static fire at Pad 2 following its previously aborted attempt with all engines. Ship 39 has also rolled to the launch site and been stacked with Booster 19 now, completing the first ever Starship version 3 full stack. And the rapid pace of operations continues as SpaceX attempted a full wet dress rehearsal ahead of Flight 12. And Ship 40 is back at the production site after completing its cryo test campaign over at Massey's. From Florida Space Coast to South Texas, we have all of this coming up and more on this week's Starship Update. Starting at the production site, Gigabay continues to rise as assembly of the 6th level progresses. The outside of the building has also received more cladding, with 4 rows now in place along the west side and a few panels going up on the eastern side. Last week we showed you the final remaining piece of Booster 17, the F section, as it rolled across to the other side of the Sanchez lot. This week, scrapping of this section has resumed, and with the section now positioned closer to Highway 4, we have a much clearer view of the process. We can even spot one of the LOX inlet filters on top of the LOX header tank, designed to prevent ice buildup from clogging the engines, a problem that we saw firsthand with Booster 9 during Starship's second flight in November of 2023. Staying in Sanchez, a ring section, likely destined as a future Starfactory work stand, has been lifted into place. During our flyover last month, we spotted several ring sections already staged in this area. Now, while Starfactory is already in full production, turning out barrel sections, nose cones, and a wide variety of other hardware, SpaceX continues to refine and improve its production line. These ongoing changes and vehicle upgrades often require new tooling, especially as the hardware itself evolves in design over time. And speaking of Starfactory, we took one more look inside and spotted the same exact nose cone that we highlighted previously, the one with this interesting piece of hardware attached to it. This week, additional hardware has been installed on this nose cone. It's looking more and more like a new testing jig of some kind. Any ideas what for? Let us know in the comments section down below. Another barrel section rolled into Megabay 2 this week, the second to last barrel for Ship 41, the F3 section. The next major step before the aft section can be mated with the rest of the stack is the installation of the transfer tubes, which consists of the methane supply lines for the 3 Raptor vacuum engines and the 3 Raptor sea level engines, along with the liquid oxygen header tank transfer tube that will feed oxygen to the 3 center engines. And looking inside Starfactory again, the transfer tube installation jig was clearly visible, now fitted with all 4 liquid methane tubes. Only the LOX transfer tube is still missing. For Ship 39, that LOX transfer tube was placed onto the jig after it had already rolled into Megabay 2. But for Ship 40, it was already placed on the stand before leaving Starfactory. So we're curious to see what the order of operations will be for Ship 41. Let's go ahead and exit Starfactory for now and head down Highway 4 towards the beach, and of course, Starship's launch site. And boy, has a lot happened here in the past week. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and rewind to the beginning of the week. Last week, we covered the anomaly that occurred during the top deck deluge test, where an explosion sent a piece of metal flying into the air. But just 2 days later, SpaceX ran another deluge system test. However, they did not include the top deck this time, meaning the repairs had likely not been complete or validated. What was exercised this time, though, was a complete retraction test of the hold-down arms, the 2 booster quick disconnects, the ship quick disconnect umbilical plate, and the tower arm itself. A full simulated liftoff sequence. With all retraction tests complete, it was time for Booster 19 to head back to the launch site. We first saw the booster transport stand move from the rocket garden over to the ring yard to pick up Booster 19 in Megabay 1. In the recent Test Like You Fly video, SpaceX revealed that the first 33 engine static fire test had been aborted due to lost sensors in the flame diverter itself. With the flame trench deluge system now tested and the repairs in place, another full duration static fire was widely expected to be performed to validate both the deluge system and the booster together. One exciting detail stood out though. In the official Block 3 booster renders, SpaceX showed the aft section painted black. Until now, we had only seen unpainted aft sections, so many of us began to lose hope that SpaceX would follow through with painting these sections. However, that changed this week when Booster 19 rolled out with its aft section freshly painted in that signature black scheme. Sitting on the transport stand, Booster 19 made its way back to the launch site and was positioned in between the chopsticks at Pad 2. Wasting no time, the booster was carried onto the orbital launch mount and joined to the twin BQDs just a few hours later. Throughout the day, SpaceX tested the grid fins by rotating them multiple times and performed pneumatic leak checks of the booster by pressurizing the tanks, holding pressure, and watching for any drops. Presumably passing those checks, it was time for the static fire itself. It all began with the chill down of the tank farm, keeping the super cold liquid oxygen and liquid methane from flashing to gas the moment they come in contact with the still warm pipes. With the new box fan vent at the tank farm now running, the massive cloud of nitrogen gas created during chill down is now directed straight up into the air instead of drifting low across Highway 4 like it did in the version 1 and version 2 era. That might sound like a small change, but if you've ever stood in that dense nitrogen cloud, you know that you can't breathe that. In the past, SpaceX had to close the road every single time that vent were to happen. Now with this new vent pushing the gas safely upward and away, they can chill down the tank farm without having to extend the road closures. A big win for rapid testing and future launch cadence. Once the tank farm was chilled, the beach cleared and the road closed, SpaceX began loading propellants into booster 19. As we've seen on recent tests, they filled the booster remarkably fast, around 35 minutes like usual. With tanking complete, the team purged all the lines with nitrogen to remove any residual propellants that could ignite during the burn, visible as vents from various outlets in the surface structure came to life. The detonation suppression system, or DSS, was then activated to inert the atmosphere beneath the orbital launch mount. With the Deluse system now also running, it was finally time to light all 33 Raptor engines. A pressure wave caused by the engine igniters burst from the flame trench first, and that was followed instantly by the furiously burning Raptor exhaust coming out both sides of the flame trench. For roughly 15 seconds, Booster 19 performed its first full-duration static fire test, and this time it looked like it achieved full thrust, something that was later confirmed by SpaceX on X. That's something the old Pad 1 design simply could not handle. Its hold-down clamps weren't strong enough to keep the booster secured at maximum power, which is why they also had to unlatch earlier in the countdown, and why the booster engines also had to fire at minimum thrust during static fire testing. The new Pad 2 infrastructure fixes all of that. If you watch the footage closely, you can clearly see the moment full thrust was reached. The engine exhaust length suddenly pushes much farther out and beyond the flame trench exit. And now, even though that was a full 33 engine static fire, things are about to get even crazier. Later that same day after the static fire, SpaceX began safing the launch site and Booster 19 in preparation for Ship 39's rollout and the first full version 3 stack. But while lowering the chopsticks to receive the ship, the carriage arms suddenly stopped partway down the tower. The carriage then crept downward in short, halting stops before finally reaching the bottom. Didn't look very good. That evening, shortly after 5 p.m. Central, 3 cranes arrived at the pad. Crews swarmed the top of the chopsticks and carriage, a clear sign that something had gone wrong. They quickly zeroed in on one of the centerline chopstick carriage skates situated on the front pillar of the launch tower, which appeared to have been damaged either by the static fire or during the lowering sequence. Now, you might think replacing a skate like this would be a major headache, but SpaceX has plenty of experience with these components and a solid procedure in place. To start, a pair of cranes hooked onto the end of the left chopstick, viewed facing the tower, and lifted it just enough to shift weight off the damaged skate. With access now clear, crews hooked up another crane, pulled the installation pin, and lifted the faulty skate out around 9:21 p.m. Central. It looks like they didn't have a direct replacement on site, because the new skate wasn't installed until about 4:30 p.m. the following day, May 8th. The swap went smoothly, and within a few hours, the chopsticks were fully operational once again. Meanwhile, the rollout of Ship 39 turned into quite the saga because of the chopstick issue. Originally planned for the afternoon of May 7th, right after the static fire, the closure windows kept shifting right as it became clear the chopsticks would not be ready in time. Ship 39 was then finally lifted onto its transport stand, but it stayed parked inside Megabay 2 until the chopsticks were fixed. Once the repair wrapped up around 6 p.m. on the 8th, the ship then rolled out at 6:45 p.m. It then paused briefly in the ring yard for what was probably the traditional team photo with the vehicle, and then finally hit Highway 4 at 7:40 p.m. Central, heading back to the launch site to be stacked on top of Booster 19 for the very first time. With 39 finally rolling out to the launch site on the night of May 8th, we got our first good look at the completed vehicle. And there are a lot of exciting version 3 upgrades visible on this first flight article. On the leeward side, we observed that RTV, or room temperature vulcanizing silicone, had been applied around the edges of the bottom of the raceway covers. The application of RTV around the rest of the raceway covers will likely be completed after the ship has rolled back to Megabay 2 following full stack testing. Near the top and bottom of the raceways, we can see all 4 drogue ports for SpaceX's probe and drogue docking system having already been installed in their steel shrouds now. It appears the actual docking hardware is already in place, suggesting they're testing the passive side of the system first on Ship 39. One of the most noticeable changes is the addition of several new gray and white tiles along the edges of the heat shield from the very top of the ship to the bottom. We don't quite know exactly what these are yet. They could be standard tiles with a different coating, or an entirely new variant. But until SpaceX comments on them, we'll have to keep speculating. As far as we can tell, there is only a single missing tile, located just behind the left forward flap outside of the crunch wrap zone. The mounting pins are still in place though, which is a strong sign that it will be installed soon. In the past, when SpaceX intentionally removed tiles for flight, they also removed the pins. On the tile experimentation front, SpaceX added several patches and individual tiles across the leeward side of the ship. There are 4 large patches plus multiple individual tiles on the hull of the ship, and 2 large patches made up of more individual tiles on the leeward sides of the aft flaps. All of them are bonded using this newer purple adhesive. You might wonder why they're testing on the leeward side as opposed to the windward side main heat shield, and specifically in these locations. The answer is simple though. SpaceX wants to minimize the risk for this very important and first version 3 vehicle during re-entry. I mean, version 3 kind of has to work by placing them in known negative pressure zones that can test how well the new tiles and adhesive hold up under the pulling forces of re-entry without endangering the entire ship. Finally, at the aft end, SpaceX treated us to an outstanding view of the engine section. What we're seeing isn't the actual aft dome though, but a protective steel cover over the dome, most likely with insulation behind it to shield the actual dome from recirculating hot gases. We can also see the much smaller false ceiling installed about halfway up the dome. The 3 sea-level Raptor engines are now almost fully visible, as there isn't the large amount of shielding present that we are used to seeing on Raptor 2s. Unlike Booster 19, SpaceX waited quite a while to begin lifting ship on top of Booster, and then night turned into day. But this isn't the first time SpaceX stacked a brand new vehicle during the night, as Booster 4 and Ship 20 were also stacked for the first time with the Chopsticks at night. After the pressurization lines were removed from ship, it was then lifted off of the brand new ship transport stand. The ship rose slowly up the tower and was then translated above Booster 19, at which point the SQD arm was extended. And then it was time to align the ship with the clamps located on Booster 19's integrated hot staging truss. SpaceX took their time here once again, making sure to not damage the clamps or the ship. Using proximity sensors and some cameras at the end of the SQD arm, plus drones, SpaceX then lowered the ship onto Booster 19, completing the first ever version 3 Starship full stack on this brand new pad. I mean, look at this thing. It's gorgeous. Next up is hooking up the SQD umbilical plate to the ship. As the access platforms were extended to reach the ship, a crew began to remove the tape covering the ports on the plate, making them accessible for the umbilical plate to attach to. SpaceX then retracted the access platform and lifted the umbilical plate for it to then extend and attach to the ship using the hooks on all 4 corners of the plate. Once the SQD umbilical was attached to the ship, SpaceX then inspected the connections and made sure that it was seated correctly until it was time to perform a full wet dress rehearsal. And sure thing, on May 9th, SpaceX closed the road at both locations near LBJ and Richardson, which is used for wet dress rehearsals and launches. This closure began at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, and we were gearing up for a full wet dress rehearsal of Ship 39 and Booster 19 for the first time. As part of these preparations, the chopsticks were moved to their launch position at the very top of the tower with the stabilizers extended, which might be a new step in the process as ship catches become a reality here, hopefully soon. This is so the stabilizers don't get hit by the aft flaps during a catch. The tank farm then spooled to life, and once all necessary events began, everything was pointing towards a 9:30 p.m. T0 for the wet dress rehearsal. However, it seemed like SpaceX ran into some issues fairly early on in prop load and scrub testing for the evening. I mean, they didn't even get into prop load as far as we could tell here, and crews are currently working on the tower vent area right now, like during recording. Like they're working on it right now.
SpaceX removed the tower vent entirely and replaced the vent with a new pipe that is much longer and lacking the tri-exits. Another key difference is that it moves the vented vapor sort of around the tower. A possible issue here was that the wind was preventing any gases or fluids from draining properly. Thus, SpaceX modified the design here to prevent that from happening again. And on Monday, SpaceX attempted a wet dress rehearsal once again. As the road was closing and both the booster and ship transport stands departed the launch site, SpaceX was already underway with tank farm chilldown. With the tank farm chilled down, it was time to fully load both vehicles for real this time. Judging by the frosty ship methane tank and the discoloration on the booster LOX tank, it shows that SpaceX is choosing to load the booster and ship around the same time, a departure from previous operations at Pad 1. About half an hour after the first frost line appeared on the vehicle, SpaceX wrapped up propellant loading on both the booster and the ship. With all lines evacuated of LOX and liquid methane, the DSS was turned on, after which the deluge system soon followed, indicating the completion of the wet dress rehearsals, simulated countdown, and intentional abort. However, SpaceX only turned on the flame buckets deluge system, and no water came out of the top deck. We do, however, expect the top deck to activate upon first motion off the pad. As SpaceX finished detanking both booster and ship, both transport stands rolled back inside the launch site, and the road and beaches were open once again. Another indication that the wet dress rehearsal went well was that the beach closures for the 12th and 13th of May have been revoked.
While Pad 2 continues final preparations and stands ready to support upcoming Starship operations, Pad 1 still has a significant amount of work ahead. This week, crews lifted additional OLM service structure A-frames in place on the assembly jig, steadily advancing the rebuild of the pad. Only time will tell what their methods are going to be for building hardware at what location, but the pace of construction here suggests that we are getting closer to seeing Pad 1 return in its upgraded configuration. Tell us in the comment section down below, how do you see final integration playing out here? Over at the tank farm, the second of the RIB methane tanks has now been moved into position in the currently operational methane storage area. With Pad 1 still yet to come online, there will likely still be more tank farm reconfigurations later on down the line. With the older tanks relocated, crews will probably soon fill the newly created space with additional large horizontal storage tanks, the same upgraded design currently in use across the tank farm. And this week, we spotted another tank being shipped into the port of Brownsville. It's currently unclear if this is for SpaceX, but if it is, keep an eye out for those ever so familiar road closures and heavy transport convoys heading from the port up to the launch site. Let's go ahead and bring it home to the Space Coast now, even though this quite obviously is not the Kennedy Space Center. Moving from Starbase's tank farm over to the one at Launch Complex 39A, multiple new vaporizers were delivered this week. But even more exciting, we saw significant venting activity coming from both sides of the tank farm, both from the Deluge system side and the main fueling area. This is a clear sign that SpaceX is connecting more and more of the systems together and bringing the infrastructure online in preparation for vehicles on the pad, hopefully before the end of the year. Before any stacking can take place on the orbital launch mount, however, the hold-down arms must undergo critical load testing to confirm that they can safely handle the full weight of a fully stacked and fully fueled Starship launch vehicle, and also be able to hold down the vehicles during a booster static fire testing. That's quite the exercise. To perform that test, a familiar piece of hardware was spotted rolling past a VAB, SpaceX's IB-proof and testing jig, which we saw here originally. This rig will be carefully lowered onto the hold-down arms, with the ends of the structure pulling on 2 clamps at a time via use of the 4 actuators, allowing crews to verify the load-bearing capability. Once one pair of arms completes testing, the jig will be rotated to test the others until the entire system is cleared. Elsewhere at 39A, a large crane has been raised. It'll be interesting to see exactly how it's put to use. This is a telescopic crane with a boom that can extend and retract hydraulically, unlike the LR13000, which extends by adding lattice sections. To support vehicle transport to the Cape, equipment has been removed from Just Read the Instructions, clearing the way for it to join Marmac 31, aka You'll Thank Me Later, in ferrying Starships and Super Heavy boosters from Starbase to Florida.
It has actually just emerged from some downtime, sporting a brand new roof structure. It almost looks like one of those OG Starbase production tents from many years ago, just floating on the water. And by just emerged, I mean we spotted this as Starship was fueling for its wet dress rehearsal earlier today.
But we're not leaving all production activity solely at Starbase though. Over at Roberts Road, Gigabay received more roof truss components this week, further completing the building structure and bringing Florida's own Starship production capability one step closer to reality. Now back here to Massey's. On May 2nd, Ship 40 rolled out on the brand new cryo thrust simulation stand at Massey's, the first Starship vehicle to use this upgraded test structure. Then on May 3rd and carrying into May 4th, SpaceX performed back-to-back cryogenic proof tests. Teams loaded the ship, detanked it, loaded it again, and detanked once more in a thorough multi-day campaign. After completing these tests, Ship 40 was rolled back to Mega Bay 2 on May 6th. It has now been placed on the back left work stand to receive raceway covers, engines, and the other final post-cryo testing additions. We'll have to wait and see exactly when it rolls back out to Massey's again for static fire testing, but current progress points towards late May or early June. And finishing this week's update at McGregor, we saw, as you probably guessed, yet more Raptor 3 engines rolling past our cameras. If you're not already, be sure to follow along with the action 24/7 with McGregor Live right here on YouTube. As has become the norm these days, and every week basically, we spotted another all-time highest serial number, a sea-level Raptor 3 carrying number 155. Well, with a successful full-duration 33-engine static fire on Booster 19, a full stack now on the pad behind me, the big question remains: when do you think Flight 12 will actually happen? And when do you expect to see the Flight 13 vehicles rolling out to the pad? Tell us all of your predictions and thoughts in the comments section down below. I'm Max Evans for NSF. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.